of Orthodox spirituality.
Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy.
A wondrous journey into Orthodoxy.
Lord, have mercy.
Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.
Lord have mercy, 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 Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy, 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 Lord have mercy.
Hello, dear listeners. We are continuing to read from the book Spiritual Awakening, the second volume in the series Spiritual Counsels by Saint Paisios. Chapter 2, Sacrifice Brings Joy. Nowadays, sacrifice is rare. A woman who had everything told me once that having children is a dizzying bother. She couldn't be bothered to be a mother. When a mother thinks like that, she becomes useless, for mothers, after all, are supposed to have love naturally. Before having her own family, a young woman may be woken up by her mother at 10 in the morning. But from the moment she becomes a mother and has to feed and bathe her child, she won't even sleep at night, because the heart starts working. When a person has a sense of sacrifice, he does not complain. He is not lazy. He rejoices. That's the key, to have a spirit of sacrifice. If that woman had said, "Oh Lord, how can I thank you? You have not only given me children, but also many material goods. So many people have nothing, and I have houses, I have property from my father. My husband earns a good salary, and I receive 2 more salaries from rents, and I have an easy life. How can I thank you, my God? I am not worthy of these things." If she thought like this, then by praising God, she would stop feeling sorry for herself. In other words, it would have been enough if she had only been grateful to God. Yeroda, sacrifice gives us joy. Oh, what joy it brings! Nowadays, people don't savor this joy of sacrifice, and this is why they are tormented. They have no ideals in them. They are too bored to live. A generous heart and self-denial are what drive us. Without this force, we are tormented. In the old days, in the villages, some people would go out at night unseen to quietly open up a pathway for others to bless and forgive them when they died. Now one seldom encounters this spirit of sacrifice. I remember a festive procession around the monastery on the Holy Mountain. As the monks walked close by a large bramble bush, their monastic veils would get snagged on a branch. Not one of them stopped for a minute to break it off and get it out of the way for the sake of the others behind. Instead, each stooped under it to avoid getting snagged. Were they bowing to the bramble bush? If it were the sacred bramble bush, then it would have been appropriate. People tend to think, "Let someone else take care of the problem. I'll just do my own work." But why don't you take care of it, since you were the first to notice? That is what worldly people who do not believe in God do. I have no use for such a life. I would rather die 1,000 deaths. The goal is for each one of us to think of the other person, of the other person's pain. People seem to have lost control. The sense of philotimo, of sacrifice, is gone. I have often told you how it was with me then with the hernia at the Kalivi. When someone rang the bell on the door, I would go and open the door, even in the snow. If someone had a serious problem, then I would not even feel my own pain, even though I had previously been sick enough for bed. I would also offer them some treat, holding the treat with one hand and the hernia with the other. Throughout our conversation, even though the pain was severe, I would not lean on anything so as not to reveal my discomfort. When the visitor left, I would again collapse from the pain. It was not that before my own pain had passed or that I had been miraculously cured, but in feeling the other person's pain, I forgot my own. The miracle happens when someone can be compassionate and feel the other's pain. The whole idea here is to be able to see the other person as a brother and feel his pain. It is this very pain that moves God and brings about the miracle. For there is nothing else which moves God as much as a noble and sacrificial spirit. But now, in our time, this kind of nobility is rare because self-love and self-interest have entered the picture. Seldom does someone say, "Let me give my turn, my place to someone else, and it's all right if I am delayed." Few are those blessed souls who think of others. Even among the spiritual people, there is a contrary spirit, a spirit of indifference. The good is good only when the one who does it sacrifices something from himself, some sleep, some rest, and so on. That is why Christ said, "But she of her penury hath cast in all the living that she had." When I am at ease and do some good, it does not have the same value. But when I am tired and someone asks me, let's say, for directions and I do it, then it has value. Or when I have had plenty of sleep and stay up all night with someone who needs help, this does not have great value. And if I'm fond of conversation, I may do this in order to enjoy the company and be entertained a little. Whereas when I am tired and make a sacrifice to help someone, then I experience a heavenly joy. It is then that I am bombarded with the blessing of God. When someone is too lazy not only to help others, but even to do something for himself, then he can get tired while resting. One who helps rests through tiring himself. One who has the spirit of sacrifice will, for example, if he sees someone physically weak working and tiring himself, tell him, "Sit down and rest," and do the work. The weak person will get physical rest, but the other will experience spiritual rest. Whatever one does, he must do with his heart, otherwise he is not transformed spiritually. Whatever is done with the heart does not tire us. The heart is like a machine that is charged. The more it works, the more it is charged. You see, the chainsaw, when it finds a soft log, goes vrr and stops. But when it finds a hard log, it forces itself, gets overcharged, and really works effectively. And not only when we give, but also when we are about to receive something, let us not think of ourselves, but let us look to see what will be of some comfort to the other person. Let us not be greedy and insatiable, believing that we are entitled to take all we want, leaving nothing for others. Yaronda, again, it is the spirit of sacrifice that enters into the situation. But in the spiritual life, the whole basis is there. Can you imagine what joy is experienced by the one who sacrifices himself? One cannot even express the joy he feels. Sublime joy emanates from sacrifice. Only when we sacrifice ourselves can we be related to Christ, for Christ is sacrifice. Man can live in paradise from here and now, or he can live in hell. Whoever does good is overjoyed, for he is rewarded with divine consolation. Whoever does evil suffers. My repose stems from the repose of others. Yaroda, if someone has not tasted the joy of sacrifice, how can he attain such a spirit of sacrifice? By putting himself in the other's place. When I was serving in the army, the machine gun post was often filled with water. The batteries for the wireless needed to be changed, and it was very difficult because the line was overloaded. I was drenched to my waist and my overcoat was dripping. Yet, I preferred to do the work myself so as not to trouble the others. And I was happy to do it. My commanding officer would tell me, "I am at ease and feel secure when you do the work, but I feel sorry for you. Let someone else go and do the work." But I would tell him, "No, I am happy to do it, sir." There was another wireless operator in our company, but during the maneuvers, I didn't let him carry the batteries or the wireless, even though they were heavy, so that he wouldn't be in danger. He pleaded with me, "Why don't you let me carry them?" And I would tell him, "You have a wife and children. If you are killed, I will have to answer to God." So God protected both of us, he didn't allow either of us to get killed. It is preferable for a sensitive person to die once out of love in order to protect his neighbor, rather than be neglectful or cowardly and then to be constantly tormented by his conscience for the rest of his life. Once, during the guerrilla warfare maneuvers, the guerrillas had cut us off outside one of the villages, and the soldiers were going to draw lots to see who would go into the village for supplies. "I'll go," I said. If some inexperienced or careless soldier had to go, he could have been killed, and then my conscience would have troubled me. It would be better, I thought, for me to die than the other soldier, and then to have my conscience killing me for the rest of my life. How could I endure that? My conscience would tell me, "You could have saved him. Why didn't you save him?" At the time, I was fasting and had not eaten, but never mind that. Our commanding officer told me, "I too prefer that you go, for you are experienced, but you should eat something to have energy." I took my weapon and set off. The guerrillas mistook me for one of their men and allowed me to pass through. I went into the village and entered a 2-storied house. An elderly woman who was there gave me supplies, and I returned to my company safely. The greatest joy I experienced in the winter, there in the snow. I remember one night waking up while the others were still sleeping. The snow had covered the tents. I went, took the wireless, removed the snow from its holes, and saw that it still worked. I ran to our commanding officer and told him. That night I saved 26 soldiers from freezing by digging them out of the snow with a shovel. I have done nothing for Christ. If only 10% of what I did in the army had been done for Christ, now I would be doing miracles. This is why later, as a monk, I would say, while in the army I went through so many hardships for my country, but now as a monk, what am I doing? In other words, compared to the hardships I endured in the army, my life as a monk was like being a prince, regardless if I had or didn't have even a crust of bread to eat. Have you any idea what kind of fasting we did during the army maneuvers? We ate granulated snow. The others ran about and found something to eat, but I could not move about with the wireless. Once we were without food for 13 days. They had rationed to us 1 loaf of bread and half a salted herring. Sometimes the only thing we had to drink was the muddy water in the hoof prints of the animals. Most of the time, I had to quench my thirst not with clean rainwater, but with muddy water. Once I even drank some orange juice. Later, as a monk, even the water that may not have been so pure seemed to me like a great blessing. At least it looked like water. Once, one afternoon, the ground line had been broken. It was December of 1948. The snow was deep. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the order was given to go to the village 2 hours away to repair the line and return. In the meantime, there were only 2 more hours of daylight. The soldiers were dead tired and didn't have the energy to start. And how was one to find the broken line in so much snow? Didn't you know the way and where the line was? Well, I had an idea where the road was, but the night was fast approaching. In any case, they gave me a group of soldiers and we started out. At first we cleared the snow from the road in the camp and proceeded a little to set our commanding officer at ease. Then I said, "Let's move on now, for we must also return." I took the lead because the others were resisting. They were grumbling. Greece never dies, but we are dying. The same thing over and over again. Again and again, I would sink into the snow, and they would lift me up. I carried a bayonet, which I would thrust into the snow to create a grounding. I had to check constantly. I would get in the front. "Move on, animals don't pass this way to cut the line. Only in some depression in the ground, where the line may be suspended over it, there is where we should check." Finally, we reached the village with terraces, but because the wind had made snowdrifts there, we could not see anything. When we reached the terraces, I fell into the snowdrift, and the others had a hard time getting me out. Gradually, going from one terrace to the next, don't even ask me how, we all descended to the village late at night. In some nearby depressions, I found the broken line dangling in 2 places. We repaired it and were able to communicate with our commander. He told us, "Return to the camp." But how were we to return to the camp? Aside from it being nighttime, how were we to climb the terraces from which we virtually had just rolled down? How were we to find our way at night? So I told him, "We made it downhill, but now it will be very difficult going uphill. Let us return tomorrow morning by going around the village." He insisted that we return that night. Fortunately, an adjutant heard the commander and pleaded with him to allow us to remain in the village that night, which we did. We received hospitality in a house, and they gave us several tserias, tserga, plural tserias, a heavy and coarse woolen blanket, a velenza, to sleep in. I was completely soaked by shoveling the snow to open the way in front, so they felt sorry for me and placed me in the middle so that I could be warm. During all that time, we had eaten just a piece of roti. I cannot remember experiencing a greater joy in my life. I had to give you these examples so that you understand what sacrifice means. I didn't tell you all these things so that you'd applaud me, but so that you understand where true joy comes from. In addition to the above, some people in the signals office would tell me lies. "My father is coming and I need to go and see him. Please take over my duties for a while." Another would say, "My sister is here," and she wasn't even his sister. Still others would say something else, and I would constantly be doing some service for one or another of my fellow soldiers and sacrificing myself. Then I would also sweep and clean, because it was forbidden for others to enter the signals company. Not even an officer from another service was permitted to enter, for it was wartime. We could not even get someone to clean, so I would pick up the broom and clean up all the areas. It was there that I learned to sweep. I simply thought to myself, this, a place of service, and in a way it is a sacred place. It cannot be untidy. I was not required to do the cleaning, nor did I know how. At home, I had never touched a broom, and if I had, my sister would have taken it from me and given me a beating with it. The others called me the cleaning woman or perpetual victim, but I never minded these things, and I never did anything to hear a thank you. I really did it with my heart, because I felt it was necessary, and I enjoyed it. Yeroda, did you have any negative thoughts? For example, did you think that fellow is just going out, he's not going to see his sister? No, I didn't have such thoughts. From the moment someone said to me, "Please, can you take my place for a while?" that was it. It was done. Sometimes someone would ask me for money and tell me it was for his children. He not only did not send the money to his children, but asked for more from his wife to spend on himself. You see? Nor did I do it to earn praise. I simply felt it as a need. Because I never took any leave, the others took advantage of this and left their work for me to do. I ended up doing all the company's work. The signals were piling up, and the lines were constantly busy. I would get worn out. Once I had a temperature of 39.5 degrees Celsius and didn't tell anyone. Finally, I fainted from exhaustion, and they took me away on a stretcher to a hospital. I heard them saying, "Come on, Benedictos." Benedictos was the name of the preacher in that region, and the fellow soldiers of the elder, when they wanted to tease him, called him Benedictos. "We are taking you with the stretcher to the garage for overhaul." They left me there alone. Who would pay any attention to me? Their concern was for the wounded, but I felt joy, the joy which comes from sacrifice, for I found my repose in the repose of others. The more we forget ourselves, the more God remembers us. Whoever has faith in God and a sacrificial spirit does not consider himself. When someone does not cultivate the spirit of sacrifice, he thinks only of himself and wants everybody else to sacrifice themselves for him. But whoever thinks only of himself is isolated from others as well as from God, a double isolation, in which case he cannot receive divine grace. He becomes a useless person. One can readily see that he who thinks constantly of himself, his difficulties and troubles and so on, will not find even some human assistance when a need arises. Not having divine assistance is one thing, but not having even some human assistance is quite another. Then he will struggle one way or another to find some help. He will torment himself trying to find some help from men, but he will not find such help. On the contrary, someone who does not think of himself, but thinks constantly of others, in the good sense, will be thought of constantly by God, and then others will also think of him. The more one forgets himself, the more God remembers him. Look at some soul in a monastery sacrificing herself, offering herself, and so on. Do you think that this will not be noticed by others? Is it possible for others not to think of this soul offering herself entirely and not thinking of herself? Is it possible for God not to think of her? This is important. Here, one can see the blessing of God, how God works. Someone is tested through the trials of life. It is there that you can see if he has real love, a true spirit of sacrifice. And when we say that someone has the spirit of sacrifice, we mean that at the time of danger, he does not consider himself, but thinks of the others. You see that even the popular proverb affirms this. A friend in need is a friend indeed. God forbid, but if bombs were to fall now, it would reveal who is thinking of others and who is thinking of himself. But someone who is used to thinking only of himself will at a time of danger also think of himself, and God will not think of him. When even now someone does not think of himself, but is thoughtful and considerate of others, he will do the same at a time of danger. It is then that it becomes clear who are truly the people with a sacrificial spirit and who are the selfish ones. If one does not start sacrificing something now, like giving up some desire or selfishness, how will he ever be able to sacrifice his life at a difficult time? If even now he thinks of the labor and tries to avoid working a little harder than the next person, how will he ever attain the state of risking his own life to save another's? If now he thinks only of himself, even in small matters, how can he then think of others when his own life is in danger? Then it will be far more difficult if difficult times come and a selfish person sees a neighbor, for example, sick with fever, collapsing in the street. He will leave him there and go away saying, "I must go and lie down to rest lest I too become sick." During wartime, your own life is struggling with the life of the other. Bravery is running to save another's life. When there is no spirit of sacrifice, everyone looks to only save himself. And it is often seen that someone who during the war tries to hide is most often found by a hand grenade. He attempts to escape and he becomes a cropper. For this reason, one must not try to escape, especially at the expense of others. I remember an incident during the Albanian War. A soldier had a stone slab to protect his head. In the meantime, he had to move over and he set the slab down. Immediately, the soldier next to him took it, saying, "Here's my chance to take it for myself now." At that moment, a mortar fell on him and killed him. He saw the incoming fire and took the slab for himself without thinking of the other soldier who would return. He thought only of himself and justified his action. Since the other soldier moved over a little, I can now take his slab for myself. Yes, he left, but it was his protective slab. Another person tried throughout the duration of the war to save himself. He thought of no one but himself. The others helped, but he stayed at home. He sought until the very end, when things became very difficult, to avoid danger. Later, when the British had come, he went to the camp, presented himself to Napoleon Zervas, and because he also had American citizenship, found an opportunity to leave for America. Napoleon Zervas, a Greek general and politician, he was one of the most significant figures of the national resistance movement against the Germans and later on against the guerrillas. As soon as he arrived there, he died. His poor wife used to say, "He tried to escape from God. He died, while others who went to war survived." Dear listeners, our time is up. Thank you for listening. We will continue once again where we left off in our next show. Until then, be well.
A hymn of thankfulness do we all raise up in song to Thee, knowing Thee to be the Mother of our God.
Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy, Lord, have
Readings of Orthodox Spirituality.
Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy,
A wondrous journey into Orthodoxy.
Lord, have mercy.
Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.